Hello, everybody. I am going to be doing a recorded version of the live reading today. We are reading the Gammage Cup. I'm unfortunately not able to live stream. Normally, I live stream every Tuesday from 8 to 9 Eastern Time. That's 7 to 8 Central. And I've been live streaming a couple of chapters of the Gammage Cup every week in honor of my sixth grade teacher who passed away in December. This was one of her favorite books. She read it to like every single class. Because I can't live stream tonight, I'm just going to post a recorded version of a couple of the chapters that I would have read tonight. So it might be a little bit shorter today, and I apologize, but I will be back next week, same time, to continue the live stream. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. We left off at chapter 11. If you have not heard me read any of the previous chapters, there's a playlist on my YouTube channel with all of our previous live streams in it, so you can go through and read those, go through and watch those, watch me read those. But we're going to go ahead and start off kind of in the middle of action. So for those of you that are caught up, here is chapter 11. Drive them, kick them, make them work. Take away the pat cakes from those who shirk. Groan, groan, moan, and sigh. Humor them, coax them, but make them slave. Drive them to toil till they fall in the grave. Groan, moan, sigh, goodbye. Gummy, scribbles, collected works. The next 3 days swirled by in a dizzy round of hard work that left no time for idle regrets over the easy life they had left behind them. At first, they went about their tasks in a helter-skelter fashion, so that nothing they started ever seemed to get quite finished. A second house must be built, watercress beds must be planted, edible roots and herbs must be found, some way of milling the reeds into flour must be discovered. And all of these things must be done at once, along with the ordinary chores of fishing, cooking, washing of clothes. It fairly makes your head spin, said Muggles wearily at sundown of the first day. They had just eaten, for in the hustle of events, nobody remembered that there was no Staggers the Supply Keeper here to turn to, and Gummy and Walter the Earl had set forth with fishing rods late in the day, while the others grubbed in the woods for the sweet root of the brown sticker plant. What we need is more order in our work, Muggles went on. We're going about it so untidily. I do dislike untidiness. I dare say you're right, said Gummy, stretching out on the grass with a tremendous yawn. But work's not the sort of thing you can pile up in neat little heaps. In fact, I don't think work is my sort of thing at all. He rolled over and pulled his toil-stained yellow cloak around him. I'm so tired that nothing even rhymes in my head. His voice drifted off into nothing. Curly Green roused him enough to make him stumble off to bed, and all the outlaws were soon under their comforters, but their good nights and good dreams sounded dispirited. Only Muggles remained awake, disturbed by the day's toil just past. Though the others tackled a new job cheerfully enough, starting out at top speed, they couldn't seem to stay at it for very long. More and more frequently they paused to talk or gaze at the sky or walk down to the little trickle for a drink of fresh water, until work became just an interval between idleness instead of the other way around. Muggles set a good example by toiling on with whatever task was at hand, but it was impossible to make an impression on folk who just weren't there to watch. Even Minji, who was steadier than the others, was not as reliable as Muggles could wish. Instead of going directly to the rock outcropping at the northern base of the knoll and carrying a load of stones directly back to the top, he was disposed to linger in the quarry, examining the rock formation, exclaiming over curiously shaped stones. By midday, when they sat down to a scratch dinner, there was only a pitifully small mound of stones at the site of the new house. But nobody save Muggles appeared to be anything but pleased with what they had wrought. Then, after dinner and a nap, Minji announced his idea of making a cart from 2 barrel tops and a basket so that they could haul the stones in it instead of over their shoulders. Immediately, everybody clamored to help mount the barrel tops on an axle of stout ash, which had previously been a broken paddle. But when they came to build the framework that would hold the basket between the 2 wheels, it was discovered that they would have to cut wood, and while Muggles had brought with her an old axe head, it had no handle. Just as enthusiastically as they had plunged into the making of the cart, they now cast it aside and rushed off to rummage on the forest floor for a suitable stick that would serve as a temporary handle so that they could then use the axe to make a proper handle for itself. When supper time caught up with them, though they ached in every joint, they had no more to show for their hard day's toil than one passable axe, the head of which flew off at every fourth stroke, 2 wheels on an axle, and a small pile of stones. At this rate, Muggles thought, winter will be upon us with no house built, no food supplies stored, and all of us miserable and worn out and bickering with each other. How had those first Minipin settlers managed when they came to the land between the mountains with their 2-wheeled carts? Was there a leader in each village to tell folks what to do next, or had they flopped aimlessly about like a hooked fish in a boat? "We've got to stop flopping," Muggles said, to the early stars winking in the sky. There was the fishing, the watercress beds, a garden, mill, storage cellar, the new house. Plans and schemes began to froth in her head like water over rapids. On that second morning, Muggles was up before the sun. When the others rolled their aching limbs out of their comforters, they were greeted by the spicy scent of herb tea and the teasing warm aroma of pat cakes drifting from Gummy's stone house. After a quick wash in the chill waters of the little trickle, they appeared at the door to find the house glistening with cleanliness. The heaps of stuff they had brought from the village and dumped willy-nilly on the floor were carefully sorted and put away on shelves and in barrels and baskets. "There is nothing tidier than a good neat pile," Muggles explained, "as long as there's just one person in the house. But it won't do for 5, I can see that. So we'll just have to muddle along with everything hidden away until we each have a house of our own." After they had eaten all the pat cakes and drunk the herb tea, Gummy leaned back and patted his stomach. "Out with it, Muggles," he said with a resigned sigh. "A mole in a pitch-black tunnel could see that you're bursting with plans for us. What do we have to do to pay for that breakfast?" "You don't have to do anything," Muggles said slowly. "But if you want to do something, well, I've had sort of an idea about things, if you'd like to hear. And if—" "Lotta iffin'," Minji rumbled. "Best just to speak out before we all get hungry again." Walter the Earl regretfully put aside the parchment he had picked up after disposing of his last pat cake. "I'm listening." "And so am I," said Curly Green. She cast a wistful look at her paint box on the shelf, but took down Muggles' mending box instead and threaded a bone needle with a length of yellow reed silk. "Hand me your cloak, Gummy. There's a rip in it." From one of the round, squat barrels, Muggles drew forth an enormous net, a smaller one of finer mesh, and 2 scoops. These she laid out on the floor. It seems to me," she said, "we'll waste too much time if we have to stop work every day to fish for our dinners. Now, my idea is this. Gummy and Walter the Earl can stake the big net beside the dock with the sides well above the water so that fish can't swim out of it. Then they use the 2 scoops to catch enough trout for several days' supply, which they will put inside the net to swim around until we need them. The fine mesh is for eggs, which you must also look for. You can anchor the little net inside the big one, and as the eggs hatch and the fish grow larger, we will empty them into the big net to make room for more eggs. By wintertime, when fishing is difficult, we will no longer have to fish at all. It will be like a garden, only a fish garden, of course." For a moment, there was startled silence, and then the others burst out in loud exclamations of praise. "But let's all help," begged Curly Green. "I'd like to collect the eggs." "You must be quiet and listen," said Walter the Earl. "Muggles is talking the most sense I have ever heard, and there is a fact." He turned his keen eyes back on her. "What else needs to be done, Muggles?" "Well, while you and Gummy are making the fish garden," Muggles went on, blushing pink with pleasure, "Minji could finish his cart for hauling rocks, and Curly Green might mark out the lines for the walls of the new house. I thought I would make a mill and grind a supply of flour. It will have to be green flour until we can make a harvest next season, but flour we must have." "But how can you make a mill?" Curly Green asked, biting a thread. "Oh, it won't be much of one. Not like Dingle the Miller's, though later I don't see why we can't have a regular water wheel to grind for us. But I saw a hollowed-out rock yesterday down in the quarry. All I have to do is find a longish, thin stone with a rounded end that will fit into the hollow bit, and I'll grind the reed into flour with that." "I'll help you grind," offered Minji. "That's a hard task." "No." Muggles' voice was firm. "There are too many things that want doing right away if we are going to make ourselves a good life on this knoll. After we've finished the new house, we must dig a storage cellar to keep roots over the winter, and we ought to have a garden right here where it will be convenient in wet weather. Then I saw some watercress in a tiny stream that flows into the little trickle. That was on our way here from Slipper on the Water. And though it's too far to go each time we need watercress, we can make a trip there to gather the roots and transplant them in the little trickle close to the knoll. Then, after we're sure of our food supply, we'll want to make furniture for the new house and invent a way of getting water up to the knoll, and I can see that it's going to be a long summer, Gummy said wryly. Curly Green cast another wistful look at her paint box on the shelf. Do you think, Muggles, that is, will there be any time at all for making blobs and scribbles and things like that? And the old mines in the mountains, Walter the Earl added. I want to see those for myself soon. Muggles nodded vigorously. Of course, just as soon as we've got the new house finished, we'll only need to work in the mornings at the other things. But just now, Walter the Earl broke in, it seems we've got a fish garden to make, so let's be about it. Come on, Gummy. He scrambled to his feet and threw his worn cloak back over his shoulders. Muggles, my compliments, he said gravely with a deep bow, and planting his hat firmly on his head, he strode to the door. Gummy made an even deeper bow. At your service, Taskmaster. He grinned impudently and followed Walter the Earl. By mid-morning, the fish garden was complete, the cart was ready, and the lines for the new house were marked out and some of the stones laid, and a supply of green flour was spread out to dry. At midday, there were enough stones and wet clay delivered to the top of the knoll to make an earnest start on the house. Muggles called a halt to the work when the sun was directly overhead, and they sat down to a big dinner of fish scooped from the new fish garden and broiled over the fire, a pot of creamy milk-root spiced with fresh wild onion, and peppermint pudding, invented by Muggles on the spur of the moment. Gummy sighed, stretching himself out on the grass with his knees cocked. Just the sort of afternoon for lying under one's hat and listening to the buzz of the bees. Don't forget to wake me up for tea. And he carefully tilted his peaked hat over his face and lowered his knees until he was flat out. Muggles looked fixedly at him, and then at the others. Just a teeny little rest, Curly Green pleaded. Then I promise I'll get Gummy up. I'll pour water in his ears. Gummy gave an imitation snore and clapped his hands over the side of his head. All right, Muggles said, and added craftily, I'll brew a pot of sassafras tea and call you when it's ready. You ought to nap too, Minji murmured sleepily. The peaked hat over Gummy's face bobbled with his muffled words. Don't be odd. How can she think up more bone-breaking tasks for us if she naps? But they'll be glad they worked so hard when it's all done, Muggles thought, as she busied herself over the fire in Gummy's house. The urge to close her eyes was almost overpowering, but she fought off sleep by mixing a batch of biscuits with some of the flour Dingle had given them, and sprinkling the tops with poppy seeds from her precious store. Refreshed by this steaming sassafras tea, even Gummy threw himself into work with a will, once more, and all afternoon the outlaws hauled stones from the quarry and set them into place with the plaster of clay until the walls were waist high. When Gummy scanned the sky and sniffed the air and pronounced rain for that night, Muggles and Curly Green hurried into the woods to dig milkroot and wild pea and crimson ground berry plants, while Walter the Earl turned over the soil at one end of the knoll for the transplants. The rain spattered down just as they had gotten the last wild pea plant settled into the garden, and they ran for the shelter of the house, joined by Minji and Gummy, who had just panted up the side of the knoll with a last cartload of rock. There was no sleeping out under the tree that night, so after supper they rolled themselves into their comforters on the floor. But after everybody had wished everybody else good dreams, Minji said suddenly, Stuffy, isn't it? Tomorrow I'll build a shelter out from that big tree. Roof on poles. Sleep outside, wet or fine. Plenty of fresh air, but no rain in the face. What do you think, Muggles? And Muggles, who as far back as she could remember had never been consulted over the simplest matter, gravely and sleepily gave her consent. The third day dawned bright and crisp. All morning long, while Minji constructed the sleeping shelter of thickly laced twigs and branches, the other outlaws, with occasional coaxing and prodding from Muggles, lugged stones up the knoll in the two-wheeled cart and cemented them into place with the river clay. Curly Green disappeared for a long interval, and when she reappeared looking flushed and secretive, Muggles wondered if she had sneaked off to paint a blob, but she pretended not to notice the long absence. Perhaps, thought Muggles, perhaps she feels that I am driving her and the others too hard. Perhaps she feels that I have no right, and I haven't really, except that somebody has to see that the work is done. All the same, she concluded wisely, possibly it would be a good idea to think up something different from carrying rocks for the rest of the day. At midday, then, as they sat down to stuffed roast trout with tarragon sauce, she suggested an expedition by boat down the little trickle to the tiny stream where she had seen the watercress growing, and was met with 4 beaming faces and a muffled whoop from Gummy. The expedition was a great success. They took all 5 boats. "A waste not to, for we'll only have one very soon," said Minji. And when they reached the stream, they pulled into the bank and walked along it until they came to where the watercress grew thickest. Leaving their woven slippers on the grass, they waded and splashed among the tender green plants, extracting a root here and a root there, until the baskets they had brought were heaped with cool, fresh watercress. Curly Green's sharp eyes spotted berry bushes growing in a sunlit glade, but it was too early for berries. "We'll come back when they are ripe," said Muggles. "I'll make jam for the winter." Then Minji found honey in a hollow tree, and several stings later had extracted a goodly supply. "Now this is my idea of work," said Gummy, laying himself out on a patch of grass to dry. "You can't make rhymes while you're carrying rocks. All the rocks get in your head and rumble around." He began to sing. "We're outlaws 5 and bold and free. We built our house beneath a tree, above the trickle's foam. We wander far and wander wide, but we always know deep down inside the knoll is our home. Jingle, tingle, ring-a-ling-ling, hear the song that the outlaws sing." The sun was still high in the sky when Muggles cajoled them back to the boats with promise of fresh watercress for tea. "Too bad we didn't bring the tea along with us," said Curly Green. "Bring it with us?" Muggles exclaimed in shocked surprise. "Why, nobody ever—" She stopped and added dubiously, "Well, I suppose it could be done." "Let's do it tomorrow, then," said Walter the Earl. "I have in mind a trip to those old mines out in the mountains. What do you think, Muggles? If we finish the walls of the new house, of course," he added hastily. Muggles felt a sudden chill race up her back. The mountain. She had almost forgotten about the mountain. "Why, of course," she said slowly. I don't see why not." "I'm shoving off," Gummy called from his boat, and he began to sing his song again. "We're outlaws 5 and bold and free." The others joined in as they paddled up the little trickle against the current. Still singing lustily, they rounded the last bend and came in sight of the knoll, rising from the bank of the stream. Muggles felt her heart warm when she saw, rising beside Gummy's cottage, the walls of the new stone house. By midday tomorrow, she thought, those spaces left in the sides will really be windows. The chimney still has to be built, but we'll get a roof on first. Woven willow, that's easiest, but next year perhaps we'll thatch. And it's ours. It belongs to us, she told herself excitedly. We didn't call in Clay the plasterer and pay him in gold pieces to build it for us. But in the middle of her exultation, a picture of the marketplace of Slipper-on-the-Water flashed clear and sharp upon her mind, and she felt a sudden longing to be back in the village once again. The next instant she had beaten down this treacherous emotion, but it remained only just submerged in her mind, ready to leap out at any unwary moment. Guiltily, she watched the others docking their boats. They were laughing and talking as though they hadn't a care in the world. Even Minji's face had taken on new crinkles, and the old frowning one seemed smoothed out. I'm much happier here, Muggles told herself firmly. And it was true. Still. She looked off up the little trickle to the piece of the Sunset Mountains visible through the trees, and her thoughts veered to the fires she had seen. How many mornings ago? There had been no time to wonder or worry about fires since they had gotten to the knoll. But tomorrow they were going... I say, Muggles, Curly Green called from the dock, can't we wait till morning to plant the watercress? Muggles jerked herself out of her uneasy reverie and paddled briskly toward the dock. We must do it now while the roots are fresh, she said, in the firm tone she had learned to use whenever work was to be done. There is a good shallow spot just upstream. We'll do all our bathing and washing of clothes below the dock, so as not to dirty the fish garden. Transplanting watercress proved to be a wet and muddy job, but at last the rootlets were all in, and the 5 outlaws trudged up the knoll to have tea. But the day's work was not yet over. The wood pile had to be replenished, and clothes must be washed. On this last point, Muggles was adamant. We must not let ourselves become careless and wild, she said. I've thought it all out. You have to be twice as neat and clean and tidy in the wilds, just to stay civilized at all. So you must change clothes now, and I'll rub the dirt out of them on that nice big rock below the dock. Minji grumbled a good deal, complaining that clothes weren't really comfortable until they got somewhat stuck to the body, but in the end, Muggles had her way. Gummy and Walter the Earl reluctantly went tramping off with the axe to cut up fallen branches for firewood, and in a few minutes Muggles was staggering down to the little trickle with a bundle of dirty clothes bigger than she. Curly Green and Mingy's offers to help had been so half-hearted that she had refused them, though now she wished they had insisted upon coming. It would take hours of scrubbing and rinsing to get the soil out of these things. However, it had been her idea to keep everybody clean, and clean they would be. I must expect to do more than my share at first, she thought. They still haven't an idea of what it means to really work. Kneeling on the bank, she dipped the garments in the fast-flowing stream, rubbed them with soap, and then slapped them against a big flat rock. Soap. That was another thing. They would have to make soap before their present supply ran out. Wood ash and fat they would need, and to get fat they would have to trap good fatty animals. Not a pleasant thing to do, not nearly as pleasant as calling it Sud the soap makers, but then Sud got his fat from animals, so it amounted to the same thing in the end. Muggles scrubbed vigorously at Mingy's stained shirt and dipped it in the rushing stream. Clothes, she thought suddenly. When our clothes wear out, we'll have to make new ones. She sat back on her heels to contemplate this new task. To make clothes, they must weave cloth. To weave cloth, they needed thread. To get thread, they must first spin it, and to spin it, they would need a spinning wheel. Muggles gave a little gasp. They didn't have a spinning wheel. For a moment, the enormity of work which faced them in every direction almost overcame her then and there. Just as the current was about to claim Mingy's shirt for its own, Muggles came to herself and snatched it back. There you go, she scolded, fussing about how we are going to make clothes, and then almost losing a precious shirt while you worry needlessly about the future. As we don't have a spinning wheel, Mingy will just have to invent one, that's all. And spinning will give us something to do when the bad weather comes. Mingy must make a loom as well. Then while one spins the reed fibers, somebody else can be weaving the thread into cloth. We can take turns. There sprang into her mind a picture of Walter the Earl, solemnly manipulating warp and weft, his plumes a nod with the effort, and she laughed along with the gurgle and splash of the merry little trickle. All the same, as she walked up the grassy slope, there was discouragement in each tired footstep, the great bundle of clean clothes clasped wetly to her front. There was no sign of the others as she stretched the garments to dry on the grass and pegged them tightly to roots, though from Gummy's house she could hear low murmurings interspersed with hushed laughter. At last the task was finished, and she sat back to survey her handiwork. Kneeling there on the grass in the darkening afternoon, with only that low murmur to break the quiet, a murmur that seemed to shut her out, Muggles suddenly felt an infinite loneliness flooding over her. I don't belong here, she thought with despair. Those others, even Mingy, are like crickets in the sun, while I am a miserable, dull ant plodding along about my dull little business. After a while, she got up and with lagging feet walked heavily toward the door of Gummy's house. There was a scramble inside, an urgent whisper, a muttered exclamation, and as she appeared in the open doorway, complete silence. The other 4 outlaws were standing in the center of the room, their faces wreathed in smiles, and in their hands, stretched out so that she could see the beautiful, billowing extent of it, was a glorious sun-orange cloak. Around the collar and down the 2 lapels, winking their fires of red and blue and green, were sewn the hundreds of glitter stones that had always been in Muggles' family, and that Reedy had tried to throw away. Muggles looked from one face to another, and then back at the wonderful cloak. The realization that here was the reason Curly Green had been slipping away from work swept all the loneliness right out of her. For me? She faltered. Walter the Earl nodded. Of course it's your own material and your own glitter stones, but Curly Green said that you would never stop working long enough to sew it for yourself. So we just sewed it for you, said Mingy. Curly Green did most, but we helped finish it. All that time you were washing the comfort out of our clothes. And I may have had some hitches, said Gummy proudly, but I've sewn the biggest stitches. And that is where we are going to stop for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sorry that we had kind of a weird little video posted instead of a live stream, but I will be back next week. Again, we live stream every Tuesday from 8 to 9 Eastern. And we will get through a couple more chapters next week. They're going to go visit the mines next week. Very exciting. So thank you for watching. This video will be on my YouTube channel, and I'll post it on social media as well. Again, you can watch the rest of the videos that I've made on YouTube on the Gammage Cup playlist. Again, thank you so much for coming, and I will see you next week. Bye!